Borden murders, top of page 46. As if she had run around the bed as far as she could. Up in the guest room, photographer James Walsh was preparing his camera equipment for what would become the most famous images he would ever capture. Famous, but imperfect. Ideally, a crime scene photo ought to depict an untouched room exactly as it appeared at the moment of discovery. Photographer Walsh was already too late for that. When she was first found, Abby Borden lay with nearly a foot of her body wedged under the bed. A yardstick was beside her. Possibly she had been using it to get the bedspread perfectly smooth when the murderer came upon her. To Charles Sawyer, the position of the body made him think she had been trying to get away from the door, as if she had run around the bed as far as she could. One wound, a slice of skin 2 or 3 inches long, was flapped back over her left ear like a hinge, suggesting she'd taken one blow, the first, while facing her killer. Whether she was attacked before or after cornering herself, no one would know for certain, but bruises on the bridge of her nose and above each eye marked where her face had struck the floor. Nose to the carpet, arms up around her face, she had evidently flailed and kicked until one of the 18 blows to the head rendered her senseless. None of this apparent struggle shows in the iconic crime scene photo snapped that afternoon. However, by the time Mr. Walsh arrived, the bed had been moved, and so had Abby Borden. Walsh's photos depict her lying neatly centered in the space between the bed and the bureau, as though she kneeled straight over like a tree trunk, pinning her arms beneath her. Her skirts are straightened demurely to her ankles, her face completely hidden by the shadow of her shoulder. In a mass of blood-blackened hair, the yardstick is nowhere to be seen. The bed had not only been moved, but stripped, searched, and remade, and rather sloppily, too, before the photographer's arrival. Andrew Borden's body, or more precisely the sofa on which it lay, had been moved as well. Mr. Borden's splintered face distracts so thoroughly from the rest of the photo, it's hard to overlook how drastically off-center the sofa is compared with the picture frame hanging above it. On the way its arms juts into the dining room doorway. If Abby Borden was indeed the kind of housekeeper who smoothed her bedspreads with a yardstick, it's difficult to imagine her abiding such an off-kilter arrangement of furniture. A closer look reveals the culprit, small casters on the sofa's feet. For whatever reason, the sofa was scooted sideways on its wheels, the movement hinted at by Mr. Borden's tipped knees and feet. Whether these shifts obscured any vital evidence is anybody's guess. Turn of the century forensics. Glaring blunders like repositioning the bodies and failing to secure the crime scene ensured that the Fall River Police Department investigation was less than ideal even by 19th century standards. Yet if the police had done everything right, they still would have neglected a great deal of what is considered fundamental evidence in the 21st century. In 1892, forensic methods common today were only beginning to germinate in countries such as England, Scotland, and India. The very idea of identifying a criminal from hair, clothing, fibers, or fingernails scrapings was unheard of. Even fingerprints evidence, which had been suggested as a unique identifier as early as 1880, was not in widespread use and would not be admissible in court in the United States until 1911. So while the police almost certainly destroyed or overlooked the minute bits of evidence that might easily crack the case today, that same evidence would have been virtually useless to investigators in 1892. Photographer Walsh took one view of Mr. Borden and two of Miss Borden, the first from behind and another with the bed moved completely out of the frame to show the full length of her body. That done, Dr. Dolan continued his grisly work. One at a time, Dolan stripped the bodies and placed them on lightweight folding examination tables called undertaker's boards. Mr. Borden in the sitting room and Miss Borden in the dining room. He sliced open their abdomens and removed their stomachs, carefully tying them off at each end to keep whatever remained of their breakfast inside. Each organ was put into its own airtight jar, sealed with wax, and shipped by express to Harvard along with the milk specimens he'd gathered that morning. Partway through the process, Mr. Walsh took 2 more photos, close-ups of the Borden's injuries as their bodies lay half opened on the undertaker's boards. The image of Mr. Borden is easily the most disturbing, showing wounds so profound it is difficult to discern his features. while Miss Borden's are obscured by the clotted mess of her hair. Their blood-soaked clothes were bundled up and sent down to the wash center, the naked victims themselves stitched back up before being covered and sequestered in the dining room for the night. By the time Emma Borden arrived on the 3:40 train from New Bedford, the interior of the 92 2nd Street was returning to some semblance of order. Dr. Bowen had worded his telegram perhaps too softly for Emma, had no thought of a greater calamity than that her father was sick. At what moment did she begin to realize her life had forever changed? At the sight of the crowds in the 2nd Street, or the policeman standing guard at the front door, how did she react? What did she say? There is hardly any record of it, only that she was overcome by the recital of the details of the murder. However awful the shock, she did not give way for long. True to form, Emma immediately began to shoulder responsibility of the household. She summoned her father's lawyer, Mr. Andrew Jennings, and asked Bridget 2 questions: whether the maid would stay on with them, and whether she had seen a boy come with a note from Miss Borden. And what did she say to her sister, her beloved baby Lizzie? Were there tears between them, tenderness and grief? Again, no one seems to know. At the inquest, less than a week later, Emma herself claimed not to remember what Lizzie had said to her about the murders. There was so much going on, Emma explained. Indeed, there was. Rather a singular coincidence. Word was out. All of the Fall River was talking about the Borden slaying. To Eli Bence, a clerk in D.R. Smith's drugstore barely 3 blocks from the scene of the crime, it seemed that his customers had spoken of nothing else all afternoon. "Why, I understand they're suspecting Miss Borden, the daughter," one lady remarked. "Is that so?" Bence asked. That, as Frank Kilroy put it when he arrived a few minutes later, was rather a singular coincidence. Both men had been in the store the previous morning, Wednesday, August 3rd, when a woman Bence knew only as a Miss Borden came in requesting 10 cents worth of prussic acid. She wanted it, she said, to put on the edges of the sealskin cape, presumably to discourage moths or vermin from nibbling the expensive fur. When Bence informed her that it was not sold except on a physician's order, the woman protested that she had bought it several times. "Well, my good lady," Bence replied, "it is something we don't sell unless by a prescription from the doctor. It is a very dangerous thing to handle. In fact, it is one of the most deadly poisons, also known as hydrogen cyanide. Diluted to a strength of just 2%, more than 4 drops might be fatal." With that, she turned and went out. "That is Andrew J. Borden's daughter," Frank Kilroy told Bence as she made her way to the door. By itself, the incident had been unusual enough to stick in his memory. Bence had never been asked prussic acid over the counter. Now it was stranger still. At the Borden's place, the hubbub had died down somewhat. 3 policemen ringed the property, standing guard. Between 8 and 9 o'clock, Officer Harrington arrived at the back door. With him was Eli Bence. But Bence did not follow Harrington all the way in. He hung back in the doorway to the hall, listening as Harrington spoke to Lizzie in the kitchen. Bence stood within Lizzie's view, but whether Lizzie noticed him or was made aware of his presence is unclear. For Harrington's purposes, it did not matter. Bence was there not to talk, but to listen. Exactly what Harrington and Lizzie said is also not known. The particulars of the conversations were not important. Officer Harrington simply needed to get Lizzie talking within Bence's earshot. Bence himself never said a word to Lizzie. He did not need to speak to her to make up his mind. That voice, the druggist thought, low and a little tremulous, matched the voice of the woman who had asked him to sell her a deadly poison only the day before. He was sure of it. The Drugstore Crusaders. Could Eli Bence have been mistaken? According to the local officers, the wife of State Police Inspector McAfee had been operating a sting in Fall River at the beginning of August, testing whether clerks would illegally furnish poison to a customer without a prescription. Just 3 days before the Borden murder, she and another woman inquired at a nearby drugstore for both arsenic and prussic acid. Their requests were refused. According to the Fall River Herald, one of the women was said to resemble Lizzie Borden. Lizzie's friend pounced on the story, eager to prove Eli Bence was wrong. That countered the Fall River Globe was absurd. As far as the Globe was concerned, Lizzie Borden resembled the Drugstore Crusaders as much as she resembled heavyweight champion John L. Sullivan.